This is part 3 of my Outlander Season 7, Episode 8 review. Once again, if you are looking to avoid spoilers for the show or the books, please do keep on scrolling. So we left off with Jamie and Claire going to the British camp to visit Simon Fraser at his deathbed, and we see that William is there. In the books, there's a slight change here in that William is originally in the tent when Jamie and Claire arrive, and he is mourning for Simon Fraser, who is someone who he really revered and admired. And Jamie has to disguise himself or hide his face because in the books, it's very, very obvious that these two are son and father. They look very similar. Obviously, in the show, they look alike, but not to the degree I would argue that the books makes that point. And so Claire leaves the tent in order to give Jamie some privacy with Simon Fraser and runs into William, who is approaching the tent. And this is another great scene between these two. I think that in the show, you're able to really visually see how Claire can love William so much. And as an extension of Jamie, naturally, she would love him. But it's also the first time that she's able to interact with this child of Jamie's as an adult male, as someone who can think for himself, is in the middle of war, clearly going through a lot of emotions, and Claire deeply sympathizes with him for that. And I think that makes all of their conversations and interactions so far this season really meaningful. And in this moment, William and Claire are discussing just the hardships of war, and he makes a comment to Claire about it. I gather you've seen a great deal of war, Mistress Fraser, and obviously we know that that is the case, but he doesn't realize that Claire also experienced the hardships of World War II, being a combat nurse. So she obviously, tells William, yes, I have. And to me, this was reminiscent of a comment that Dougal had said before to Claire when she handled the violence really well back, I think it was like at Castle Leoch, maybe like the Gathering episode, but early on in the show when Dougal acknowledged that Claire was not afraid of war, she was not afraid of violence, and Williams had observed that in Claire as well. And that's the second time this episode that we've had that sort of comment aimed at Claire, the conversation that she has earlier on in the episode with Denny about how you have to have this very strong perspective that you haven't lost all these people, you've saved many more, and how hard it is to juggle that without getting so caught up and consumed by it. And obviously Denny, this is the first time that he's experiencing that for himself. And Claire does a really good job trying to calm his nerves and explain to him that you kind of have to focus on the people that you save and not the people that you lost, because there would be more losses if you weren't here. So when Jamie is finally done with Simon Fraser and the conversation they have, he opens the curtain to the tent, and in the Highland culture, that is meant to let the spirit of the person who has passed away release from their body. And so Jamie does that. There's also a passage talking about that in the books. I'm going to include snippets from the scene on the screen because I think it's important to kind of juxtapose the show version to the book version. There's slight differences. But when they're leaving, Jamie hears William, who is talking with some of his fellow soldiers, and they ask him where his hat went. Remember, at this point, Jamie has gone through a lot of emotional hardships today. He nearly killed William, and now William is not directly acknowledging it to Jamie, but acknowledging the fact that someone shot the hat off of his head, and it kills Jamie that it was him and that it came that close once again. He tells Claire earlier about how when he was a baby and he was in the residence that he was born in, he almost shot and killed William then, but he killed his father. So Jamie, at this point in the books, we get this great kind of internal monologue through Claire's eyes about how he just can't help himself but feel like he has to right this wrong that he inadvertently caused today. And so we see him approach William, and William at this point recognizes that he is James Fraser, but in the books, we'll get to this part, but it's not obvious to him initially that he looks so similar to Jamie, and obviously in the show they don't look like twins. They resemble each other, but they're not as much as the book portrays. So Jamie approaches William and gives him his hat. And obviously, he just insulted the man that did it and called him names. And then to have James Fraser approach you and give you a hat and say, sorry, I shot it off your head. Obviously, a little jarring for William as well. But for Jamie, it feels like the one almost olive branch that he can offer him, because he doesn't know if this is going to be the last time he sees his son. And it's the least he can do to kind of let himself be okay with this poor relationship that he has with William, and that he can never really tell him who he is to him, and he doesn't want that to be the last memory he has of William if they never see each other again. But of course for Claire, she gets angry with Jamie because they're putting everyone at risk if he has them stand next to each other. They're so close in resemblance. So she's asking him, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And again, I'll put passages up here so you can read the actual text. But Jamie says to her everything that I just kind of recapped, that he had a horrible day. He lost his kinmen. He almost killed his son. He just felt compelled to do this for William. And I think Sam did a really wonderful job acting and conveying those emotions that are going on in Jamie, and the inner conflict that he's been dealing with, knowing that William is fighting in this war this whole time. It's been this thing looming in the back of his head that he is going to have to fight opposite his own son, and his worst imagining of what could have happened today, and it's just been weighing on him really hard. The one difference is that in the books, the officer that William is standing with, he gives him his promotion. That is all the same, but he makes a comment about how he and Jamie and William resemble each other so much. One would think that they were related, and how he must be Scottish as well. I'll put the passage above, but they didn't do that in the show, and I don't know why, because I feel like that's the first time that William in the book actually feels compelled, I guess, to think about Jamie in maybe a slightly different lens, perhaps kind of unearthing these subconscious thoughts about him that he might have always had but never really thought about. And to have somebody in his company acknowledge their resemblance was, to me, the first time that I think William really even considered the possibility. The next day we see that Jamie is asked by I think it's General Gates to bring Simon Fraser's body back to Scotland. So again, he is Jamie and Claire's ticket back home. They are able to bring him on a British ship back to Scotland under safe passage, and they are able to bring young Ian with them. And so Jamie is finally getting out of this war and going back home like they intended. They went in a very roundabout way. It's been, I think, about a year since they initially set out to go to Scotland. So for him, this is a huge relief. And for Claire as well, I think she has always known that Jamie is just never going to turn away from a fight unless he has some sort of outside impetus steering him in another direction. And this is the first time where they've actually been able to rightfully and honorably leave this war. Back in Lollybrock, we see that Roger is getting ready to leave to go after Jemmy. They really used this as a good kind of cutoff point for this storyline, and I've touched upon what happens in the books with their storyline briefly, but I can probably do another video talking about what happens with them, but very little Roger and Bree this episode. Then we see the return of Arch Bug, who comes across Rachel as she's walking in the woods. Rollo has been left with her. He is under her care, and obviously Arch knows who Rollo is. So he kind of figures out that Rachel is someone who young Ian loves, and we see him come back multiple times to go after her, so to speak. So he will be back again. We get a very funny callback to the fact that Jamie is incredibly seasick while traveling across the ocean to Scotland. And we end with this beautiful scene of Jamie and Claire looking out at Scotland and all the mountains, and Ian is with them, and Jamie, you can tell, just feels incredibly relieved to be back home. I thought Sam did an excellent job in this scene too, and it was a very nice callback to the end of season 1 when they traveled to France and looking out at their new future and the possibilities that will present themselves to them once they land in Scotland. So I loved this episode. Let me know your thoughts down below. Hope